There is an interesting little story behind that last song that these ladies sang. I was years ago driving to my parents' home from McCullumney Hill, which is in the Sierra foothills, and I had an appointment, and it was important that I get there, but there was a blinding rainstorm, and I could hardly see 50 feet ahead of me, and you can't drive fast when it's raining that hard, and I was feeling frustrated and more frustrated, as one can do, when it suddenly occurred to me that if I can't have decent weather outside, at least I can produce my own good weather inside. And suddenly this song came to me, this joy in the heavens, and I wrote it down. I know it was double peril that way, what with the rain falling and me writing a song. But anyway, I'm here safely. Many times in my life, and I'm sure also in yours, we have seen, it's a common human experience, that we felt blocked by something. We didn't know the answer. It seemed as if there was no solution. And all of a sudden, the doors opened and we understood what we could do. How many times? Well, just a simple little illustration. You may enjoy, as I sometimes enjoy, but usually not, doing the crossword puzzle. The reason I don't is that I really don't care who won the Olympics in 1923 and all sorts of totally useless information, but still, sometimes they ask you some interesting questions and I get sucked in. And sometimes, mind you, the sometimes is a euphemism, I don't have the answer. But what I've noticed again and again is that in the morning, something that seemed totally obscure suddenly is clear. How many times I've noticed in my life, and I'm sure you have too, that when the energy is right, when the mind is relaxed, when the energy is flowing, suddenly you know things that you don't know otherwise. Sometimes you need to rest. Sometimes you need to get in tune. I remember an interesting experience that, excuse me, I've not been well for a year, over a year, but I think I can hang in there anyway, if you can bear with the coughing. I was I guess it was Zurich in Switzerland, and I had been studying Italian, and I knew it somewhat, but I was new at the language, and so I was still pretty rickety, you might say. And some friends of mine asked me a very simple question in Italian. I said, look, we're surrounded by people thinking German here. I think German, I can speak German. I can't even think one word in Italian. Wait till we get to Lugano, which is the Italian part of Switzerland, and then I'll have the answer. Well, in fact, it happened exactly that way. When we reached Lugano, there we were surrounded by people thinking in Italian, and the answer became perfectly obvious and clear. Many times we are affected far more than we know by the thoughts of other people around us, by the energy around us. Many times, I remember one time somebody came to me at Ananda village. They wanted to know whether we should buy a press, and there was a press available in some city in Dallas, or in Texas, maybe Dallas. And I said, they wanted to know whether we should buy it. And I said, well, look, I've just finished giving a Sunday service. Let me enjoy my lunch. I've got people after lunch that I've got to talk to. Give me time. They said, we can't give you time. The man's on the phone and he has to have an answer this minute. Well, from not being able to imagine an answer, when I found that I had to, I put my will into generating the energy, and suddenly I knew the answer, which in this case was, yes, let's buy it. But again and again, there are two things that are responsible here. One is being rested so that the energy can flow. The other is putting out the willpower to make it flow. Both aspects are very important in all our lives. Now, we're living in an age when things look in many ways quite hopeless. I don't know if you've been keeping up on the economy of the country and of the world, but it's not good. The thing that happened to WorldCom, is that the name of it? Wasn't all that great, but it's nothing. It's peanuts. Merck, which is a huge company, is 14 billion, not just 3.8 in the hole. Other companies are just as far in the hole, like 12 billion, 13 billion. We're in a bad state. And you're going to be seeing more and more of this over the months that come. It's important that you do something about it, but it's only one crisis. We're living in a time of crisis. What has happened, and this is a very interesting thing that I don't have time to touch on in depth, but it's well worth looking at least superficially. In the ancient traditions of India, there is a cyclic evolution that mankind as a whole, the world as a whole, becomes more open, that is to say, more ready to receive the energy and also more willing to generate that kind of energy. Both are a very important aspect of human evolution, where we see that mankind rises for a certain period of time and then descends. Now, the explanation which was given by my guru's guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar, who was also a great mathematician, astronomer, he said, and he said it back in a time when there was no knowledge. Mind you, they were still thinking that the sun was the center of the universe. At that time, Sri Yukteswar said that the center of our star system is in a certain place. We are moving toward that center. Astronomers didn't know that we were moving within a galaxy. I remember when I was a young boy, really, I think it was in 1918 that Hubble discovered that what had been thought to be the nebula in Andromeda was actually another whole star system. When I was a schoolboy in England in the late 1930s, a professor, a teacher there, told me with great amazement, he said, "Do you know that there are even maybe as many as 2 or 3 such star systems?" Mind you, this is how ignorant they were. He said, if you were to represent our whole star system with a little bun that you have for breakfast, Danish bun or whatever, he called it a Bath bun, the nearest star system would be 2 or 3 miles away. And he just blew my mind when he said there are 2 or 3 other systems. Well, I tell you, such was my ignorance that I was giving a lecture in the 50s and mentioning that there may be even 2 or 3 such things. Somebody said, listen, you'd better get it straight. There are 100 billion such star systems. I mean, who's counting when you reach that number? It no longer seems real. But this universe is so much broader than anybody could imagine. But the interesting thing is that Sri Yukteswar, writing in 1894, was saying things that hadn't even been discovered in astronomy. But he was drawing from ancient traditions of a time when people, after all, back in the ancient Indian writings, they had scientists then. They knew all sorts of things that we're only rediscovering. But he said back in that time, they used to say that as many as are the motes of dust in a sunbeam, so are there stars in just the galaxy. It's an incredibly vast universe, but he was saying that we are not the center of the universe. We're moving toward the center at a time when nobody knew that we weren't the center. Nobody had any idea where we were moving, in which direction we were moving, and he said that the direction in which we're moving is toward that center. Well, this is all very interesting in itself, and also in the fact that nobody even knew it. He said another thing that was very interesting that wasn't discovered until quite a bit later, I think 11 years later, that matter is really energy. This was an astounding thing to say then. I remember I think it was Macaulay, but I'm really not entirely up on these things if I can't do the research. But it was a great mathematician and physicist in England back in the 19th century, no longer the last century. And he said that if you can't give me a model, I can't accept it. People's thinking was so bound by mechanics and the way they thought of the whole universe as sort of a clockwork mechanism. Then along came Lobachevsky and Bolyai in Hungary, Lobachevsky in Russia, who discovered that Euclidean geometry is really a fallacy, not wrong in itself, but by no means the last word. That in fact, and they discovered a geometry that was spherical, and they said that it explains things far more truly than anything Euclidean can do. People thought they were crazy. Later, when they began to be sort of more accepted by a few, the leading mathematician in France admitted he'd had this idea himself also, but was afraid that he'd be thought crazy and just didn't say anything. People were so far from modern understanding. We're living in an age of incredible opening, of vision, of insight into the nature of the world. And in this opening, something has happened. We're beginning to lose touch with what we thought were values. And because of that, people are losing what they thought was their morality, their religion, their grip on the idea of there being a God up there. All our spiritual values have been really challenged, and some people feel quite self-righteous about there being no God. Well, all they really can say, I mean, what do you really know about these things? I remember somebody was trying to convert me to his church, and I was trying to tell him that, look, there's so many different ways of approaching truth. I think the main thing is that we can't really accept old definitions of God, but we can't say there isn't a God. No, I had to join his church, and I would only be saved if I did, and so on. I said, finally, there's one thing we just have to agree on. Neither of us knows what he's talking about. How can you be dogmatic about something that infinite? But you can begin to see what your own needs are, what your realities are. You need to learn to test these things on the bedrock of your experience. Ultimately, I think no wisdom comes except by personal experience. It isn't something you accept from Jesus Christ or Buddha or Krishna. It isn't something you read in the Bible. It isn't something you accept from some philosopher. You've got to say, yes, this corresponds with what I have learned. And until you do, you can't say anything, really. You can hypothesize, okay, but you can't dogmatize. This is what has happened in science. When Copernicus discovered that the universe, what we think thought, it wasn't really thought of as the universe, it was thought of as a few little stars out there with the Earth as the center of it all. When he discovered that the Earth is not the center, he made the sun the center, and it took quite a few centuries, in fact, just about in the lifetime of a few very old people today, when they discovered the sun wasn't the center. But it was quite recently. And at that time, it created an upheaval. When they were, and mind you, that poor fellow, he sat on his invention, his discovery, for some 30 or 35 years, I forget the exact figure, because he was afraid of the church and afraid of being condemned for his beliefs, and finally decided, well, it's just too definitely true, I have to publish it. And the students in the university town near where the press was that was printing his discovery, they actually tried to destroy the printing press so his book couldn't be published. The printers had to barricade their shop in order to be able to finish the job. Galileo, who made more or less the same discovery with a telescope, which they didn't have in the time of Copernicus, Galileo made the same discovery. He realized the Earth is not the center of everything. He realized that, by then they knew it was round because Christopher Columbus had sailed the ocean blue, as we all know. With this discovery, the thought that man is very central to everything gradually began to evaporate until now people sort of, in the name of science even, I remember an article I read in Scientific American, I think it was, by a psychologist named James Crow, who asked what to him was a rhetorical question. Has man progressed more developing a brain than the elephant has by developing a trunk? The reason it was rhetorical was that to his mind, he expected that people would say, of course not. Who are we egotistically to say that we've developed something more than the elephant? Well, to me, this is ridiculous. But it shows the depth of absurdity to which the human mind has gone in the name of a false humility to sort of erase man from the whole scene and make it seem, I know when I was a child of 6, my dad said to me one time, he was a scientist too, and he said that, well, the dinosaurs have had a chance, and this thing and that thing has had a chance. Man's finally in charge now. But in the future, who knows, maybe the birds will get their turn. And I thought, this is for the birds. No, that expression was not known to me at the time. But indeed, it did not make sense that we would just sort of, by a lottery raffle, be assigned to be the dominant species for a certain time. There's something that is wrong with the whole concept of diminishing man to the point where we're no more than another mechanism. And that's what we find today. I know that you know Descartes, his statement, I think, therefore I am. Well, what does it take to think? Why could he not say that? Well, because it's not scientific. You have to do the judgment, and you can't see consciousness. You can see thinking up to a certain point. You can't see consciousness. The extent to which science tries to eliminate the observer from his observation reaches a certain level of absurdity. But the fact is that you and I, when you leave this church, apart from the fact that you will certainly be wary that there is the possibility of a car barreling down the street and knocking you over, and therefore you'll stay on the sidewalk, and before you cross the street, you'll look left and right. That is not the center of your preoccupation. You're going to be far more interested in enjoying, I hope, the fact that you've been to a good lecture. The fact is that you want to enjoy your life. You want to benefit from things. You don't think about surviving. You don't walk down a country lane worrying about some snake leaping out of a bush. There's always that possibility, and you always, if you know there are snakes around, but you don't think about it. Now, Darwin's whole thing, his mechanism of survival, is really apart from the point. That's not what we are doing. Yes, we want to survive, but it's not our central focus. We are here to be conscious, to enjoy. Why couldn't he bring those things in? Because it was, again, apparently a scientific thing to talk about things you can measure. But I think that consciousness is surely a measure of evolution, much more important than Darwinian survival of the fittest. In fact, even a monkey, when it drops a banana and goes for a nut, it's not trying to survive. If it were only interested in survival, it would grab that banana and eat while it could. It's trying to enjoy. Okay, I know the banana, let's try that nut. You know, life itself is full of examples of creatures as well as people just trying to have a good time. Indeed, the very purpose of life is to understand, to be more aware, to be more conscious. But we are, in our upbringing that you've all been subjected to it. I'm sure you've been. I've been. All the doubts that have been introduced by various philosophers, various scientists, telling us that man has no place in this universe except as a mere cipher, that the purpose of life is just a mechanical thing, that the scientist's view of life only as a mechanism is the only thing that counts. Well, about a year, a little bit ago, I came upon a book, not this one, this is the result of coming upon that book. It was called Books That Changed the World. And it talked about Copernicus and Machiavelli and Adam Smith and Darwin and Freud and Karl Marx and all these people who basically, I think we have to admit, have molded modern thought. Well, yes, I had been molded also by people like Thoreau and Emerson and others. I was very much a follower of their way of thinking. But the general thinking has been all toward materialism, toward competition, toward people getting theirs, and all against any kinds of spiritual consciousness and concepts. Adam Smith is a very good example. He said that the goal of life is everybody is interested in himself. Well, that seems fairly obvious to me. I think it should be to all of us. He says a baker doesn't open his bakery shop in order to serve you. He's interested in earning enough money so he can take care of his family. Seems pretty self-evident to me. But he created an absolute outrage. People said, what about Jesus Christ? And it's more blessed to give than to receive. And what about spiritual values? And they created such a lot of dust instead of just calmly sitting back and thinking about it. So much of the controversies in modern times have been people getting overexcited about things. And because of their excessive excitement, they no longer can really think things through clearly. So I looked at this thing about Adam Smith. I said, well, yeah, that seems obvious enough, but wait a minute. He's narrowed it down to a baker. Okay, that's fine. It's a good thing to get an example. But I said, what about two bakers? Let's say that here's one baker in town. His name is, let's call him William Baker, okay? And however, there's another baker in town, and we'll call him Joe Crumpet. I didn't know what crumpets tasted like. I'd forgotten, so I phoned an English friend of mine, and we had crumpets that afternoon for tea. But anyway, William Baker is very much in the camp of, I'm only doing this for myself and my family. It's like a woman that I met in Taormina in Sicily 3 years ago, I think it was. And I went into her shop and was looking for a hat. And I wasn't sure which hat was interesting or which one I'd want. And I asked her, well, what do you find your customers like? She said, oh, I never ask them. I don't care about them. I'm only interested in taking their money and they can leave. That's all I care about. I said, well, listen, here you are 8 hours a day, or who knows how many hours in the shop every day. If you're only thinking that way, you must be having not a very happy life. If you're only thinking about what you can get from other people, what's it doing for you? If they pay you, okay, you get something. So what? You can get a better soup when you go home to dinner? There's something wrong here. I said, why don't you think about being happy? Well, it seemed like a bit of a presumptuous thing, but I really felt I should give it to her. And I came back and she greeted me with great affection. I guess she thought about it and decided this was a good idea. And, you know, in the hotel, they had given us a bottle of wine. And this bottle of wine was something I don't drink, and none of my friends do. And so I thought, well, I'd like to give it to somebody. And I had made a number of friends in the town, but I thought, well, that woman's the one who needs it. So I took her this bottle of wine. You know, she was weeping. She said, can I kiss you? And she kissed me on the cheek, and it was totally changed. Now, how much more worth is life this way? If you can have friends for customers, well, just think of Joe Crumpet. Joe thinks of his customers that way. When his customers come to the shop, yes, of course he's there. Yes, of course he's there to earn a living. He's got to support his family. He has to think that way too. But his first thought when people come in the door is that they're his friends. And he welcomes them as friends and asks them after their family and how are you doing and how's your health and have you gotten over your cold and little things like that. And Then he says, well, do you like what I'm making? Is there something that I can do to improve my offering? He thinks of his customers' welfare in addition to his own. Well, if you see the two, William Baker's probably got ulcers, probably got deeply lined expression. He's not happy. Joe Crumpet is happy in addition to working. So look, it's self-evident that we're interested in ourselves. We've got to start somewhere, for God's sake. It would be a waste of time to worry about people over there in the Philippines if I haven't got my own thing together. I know when I was a boy in Romania, and I wouldn't eat because I didn't eat very much, and my mother would say, well, think of the poor starving Chinese. I said, well, let's send it to them. Well, you do think about yourself because you can't help it. You've got to begin somewhere. This is where you're conscious. But can't you expand that consciousness? You see, there are two kinds of ego, two kinds of selfishness. One is thinking of taking. That's William Baker. The other is thinking of giving. That's Joe Crumpet. Ego is a necessary factor of life. We all have it. We all have to begin with that. And in fact, this is one of the discoveries of modern science, that in realizing that really there isn't any center in the whole universe, we come down to what science also says, which is the key to the universe is the atom. The smallest little thing. From that you can begin to expand your understanding of other things. But until you know the atom, you don't understand how anything works. Man is the atom. The ego is the atom. That's why the Greek saying, gnothis auton, know thyself. The more you know yourself, the more you can know other people. And the less you know of yourself, how can you know of anybody else? Knowledge of other people doesn't come from sitting there and analyzing them cynically. Not at all. It comes from understanding your own motivations. So, in fact, although science seems to have stripped us of the vital fact of man's importance in the overall scheme of things, actually he's made us supremely important. Each one has to begin where he is. And from that beginning, from that center, then he can begin to understand his relationship to life. To the extent that you can enjoy, are you able to enjoy? That seems too self-evident even to say, and yet it really amounts to that. That you can see, perceive, enjoy to the extent that you are capable. The more conscious you are, the more aware of other things you are. The more sensitive you are, the more you feel other people. Now, there are other kinds of ego in which people think only like that woman in Taormina, me, I don't care about my customers, I don't care about other people, just me. But you notice that people like that are not happy. And you have only to walk or stand in the streets of any big city and watch people going by. And you'll see some people show happiness, other people show closedness. And the difference is entirely the direction of their own self-consciousness. You know, it's a very interesting thing because Western Christian theologians say that the big objection that they have to the Hindu teachings is that the Hindus say that God is the self. Well, they say, how can God be the self? They don't see it in terms of an enlightened self. Well, God is the self in this way, that first of all, how did God create you and me? He didn't have flesh sort of sitting around that he could mold. There was nothing, in fact. There was only his consciousness. Nothing, even the Bible says this, in the beginning everything was void. How did he create it? Out of his own consciousness. He dreamed it. Now it looks, you say, well, how can this is pretty solid, isn't it? When Samuel Johnson he heard from Boswell that this was what Bishop Berkeley was talking about in Ireland, that this is everything is in the mind. He gave Boswell a good kick in the pants. He said, is that just in your mind? Well, yes, it was. It just showed a lack of understanding. Yes, it's in the mind. Everything's in the mind. God produced it mentally as a dream. If when you're dreaming you hit your dream head hurts. When you wake up, you say, oh, that was just a dream. But while you're dreaming, it seemed very real. Now, this dream of God's, He produced you and me. But it's like, to use an illustration that Yogananda gave us, the gas in a burner, a stove. On your stove, you can see all the little individual jets of flame. Each one seems separate, but we know that, of course, they're only projections of that same gas coming up through different sized openings. Now we could enlarge one opening, make it seem like a bigger flame. We could put saltpeter or different kinds of chemicals and so on it. It would burn different colors. Each would seem to have a different color. We still know it's just the jet, isn't it so? The same thing is true with us, that God has produced us out of His consciousness, but because it sort of comes up through the hole of this little ego, we think that we're separate. And so I was discussing with Jyotish the other day on the subject of cruelty. How is it possible that people can enjoy being cruel to one another? And the obvious answer is that it's an affirmation in their minds that they aren't that person who's suffering. As Sartre said, in one of his usual stupidities, he said that to be conscious of another is to be conscious of that which one is not. But the truth is, the more sensitive you are, the more you do feel their pain, the more you do feel their joy, the more you're aware that there is a relationship with other people. Now, the more sensitive you become, the more refined your consciousness, the more you realize that this consciousness is in you, but in everything. I remember one time we were at the Lake Shrine in Southern California, in Pacific Palisades, and we were getting it ready for the grand opening. We were moving a tropical plant into position, and Yogananda was down below, sort of telling us, move it a little bit this way and a little bit higher and so on. And I guess we handled it a bit roughly, and I remember him saying, be careful, can't you feel it's alive? Even plants are living. Science has begun to discover these things. They discovered that plants are sensitive to music. They love waltz music. Radishes love jazz. Plants in general hate rock and roll. If you plant a plant in a little box and play rock and roll, it'll do its best to get away, to put out tendrils to grow out of its box. Whereas if you play classical music or waltz music, it'll put out tendrils to embrace the loudspeaker. Plants have consciousness. It's not just the heliotropic influence of the sun that makes them turn toward the sun. There's consciousness in everything. In fact, I've always loved a story of a Sonia something or other. I don't remember her name. I imagine some of you know it. A woman who has some sort of ability to tune in telepathically to animals. And this woman, this couple came to her and they were worried because this dog of theirs was suddenly not eating anymore. And she tuned into the dog's consciousness. You can't talk with animals, but you see that they can project certain images. And she understood from this projection that first there were 2 new dogs in the home, and second, that they had bought new shiny tin plates for those dogs, whereas this older dog was still eating out of its porcelain plate. And the dog didn't like it. It wanted... Honestly, I think there's aesthetics in all nature. Why are butterflies so beautiful? Why do peacocks display their beautiful feathers? I don't see peahens doing it. They don't like them as well. It's the male that's beautiful. Doesn't seem fair, does it? Never mind. We get ours then, and you get yours now. And so it is that there is, and I believe, maybe I'm just being fanciful, but why should it? Why should aesthetics be something that you and I just suddenly created by being human? There's aesthetics in everything. Nature glories in its beauty. Personally, I prefer to think that way. But yes, we're getting away from my subject tonight because I want to be very reasonable. Okay. We find that there is an importance, there is a need to think for what will satisfy me. What will I get out of it? I've got to begin with that. But I discover that the more I think of taking it, the less I have, whereas the more I think of giving, sharing, getting others to enjoy also, the more I feel fulfilled. That is the biggest trouble that we're facing in America today, greed. People think, how am I going to get rich? How can I get... And this idea of hurting other people in order to get more for yourself, and it's just business. Well, it isn't just business, it's stupidity. It's avarice, and avarice is not the divine law. Yes, America's going to suffer, the world's going to suffer. The whole world is really teetering on the brink of a colossal tragedy. You'll see. But we have to understand more than that. And that is that the whole purpose of it is to understand what we need to do with this ego. We've been given self-consciousness in order to expand it, to become more sensitively aware of the needs of other people. Now, what I've noticed is, and the book that I wrote, that I used as my sort of springboard for this new book, Hope for a Better World, was all those writers they predicated their philosophy on selfishness, competition, greed, as the norms of life. I know when I grew up, I used to think there just can't be that. It just can't be the answer to everything. Yes, it's a dog-eat-dog world if dogs like eating dogs, but I think there's a lot more involved here, that even dogs have a certain sense of loyalty. I know in Teliagen, Romania, one time a friend of ours was leaving her home, and a mad dog in the area, the gate happened to be open, and the mad dog, we had 2 or 3 in my childhood, this mad dog came in the gate. Well, she had a German shepherd with her. This German shepherd was just a dog. A dear pet, yes, but you might say, no, not a reasoning animal, and so on. Well, this German shepherd knew that mad dog could not be fought. She understood it well enough to know that she'd die anyway as soon as that dog bit her. She had another option, which was to flee and let the dog bite her owner. She wouldn't do it. She stood in front of her owner, let that mad dog bite her, and then run off barking madly into the distance, and somebody finally shot it and killed it. She knew she'd die. She did die. One would love for a story like that to end happily, but it ended happily in this sense at least, that she showed a noble character, even though she was only an animal. There is nobility. There's nobility in all life. What we need to do is understand that the essence of life is not getting yours, not hurting other people, not just competition. Somebody wrote something, well, it makes perfect sense anyway, that by cooperation people can get so much more. Yogananda used to say that in a town of, let's say, 1,000 people, if everybody is a friend to everybody, everybody has 999 friends. But if everybody is competing, everybody has 999 enemies. Now, which would you prefer? You get much more by cooperation. Listen, this is one of the things that I'm here to talk about tonight. Communities. I've always believed, from the age of 15, I began to think that the answer to it all is people learning to live together, not imposing a great philosophy on everybody like Marxism or socialism or anything else, and then insisting that everybody fit into this mold, like Procrusties with his bed, who used to, you know the legend, it was from the life of Theseus, how Procrusties would take these people. He was a monster. He would take his guests, tie them to a bed. If they were too long, he would just lop off their legs and let them bleed to death. If they were too short, he had a machine that stretched them to the right length and they'd die in agony. Well, Theseus knew what he was doing and he killed him, fortunately. But it's really, a lot of those old Greek stories are allegories. This is an allegory for logic. You get a theory and you try to fit everybody into that theory, and they have to fit or not. Plato, he's the first one I know, perhaps Pythagoras also, but I don't know him, who came up with the idea in the Republic of communities. Well, it was a pretty horrible outline that he gave, but I'm not going to go into that. What I want to say is that the king of Syracuse invited him to come and impose this system on the people of Syracuse. He did. The experiment was a complete fiasco. And still people are willing today to ponder learnedly over Plato's theories of community. They didn't work. It didn't work. It couldn't have worked. Common sense would tell you it wouldn't work. Still, they talk about it because he was Plato. Well, the theories are not enough. We need actual work. Does it work? This is the question I ask repeatedly in my book. And you find that what I found was with communities that if you look at Marxism, when you have to kill, as Russia and China are estimated to have done, 100 million of their own people, their so-called comrades, in order to prove that communism works, something's not going right. Anybody who doesn't fit your system, like Procrusties is bad, that's all right. We still work beautifully, just like the movie Ninochka, where Greta Garbo arrives in Paris and is talking about the latest pogrom, and she's saying, there will be fewer but better Russians. Well, this is not the answer. But my thought was, and I had it at the age of 15, and I've been blessed and fortunate enough to be able to prove it. We've been functioning as communities now for 35 years. It's a long time. And what we've seen is that what you have to do is get people, first of all, not force anything on anybody. Offer it to them. If they like it, fine. Now, Orville and Wilbur Wright, when they invented the airplane, put it in the air at Kitty Hawk, all the experts, all the scientists, everybody had said it can't be done. Well, all they had to do was put it in the air, make it work, and so the airplane became accepted. And now we wouldn't think of going to New York by any other way, usually, except by air. Show a thing that works and people will follow it. That's the answer for communities. Don't do it on a massive scale. Always we tend to think in terms of large scales and great theories and social reforms and so on. Why not reform your own life, for God's sake? Why not figure out what's going to work for me? And if you find a few friends, when I was 15, I tried to get all my friends interested, and because I was so enthusiastic, they'd all liked the idea until they found I was serious, and they all, I was left alone holding the candle. And yet I kept thinking about this idea, and it seemed to me the only thing that could really change this world, if a few people can offer, and they have to experiment and try, but how else are you going to learn? Don't have theories you've got to bend everybody into, force everybody into, lop their legs off to make them fit. No, just see if it works. Let a few people join you if they like the idea, and if over a period of time they find that it does work, other people begin to come. And now we find that people are coming from all over the place because they see, well, yes, it works. People living this way are happy. People living this way are getting what they all want. Now, that's another thing that I was looking for. When I was in my teens, I was thinking, well, I wanted to know truth. And first of all, I thought through science, then I thought through politics, and then my main interest had always been through the arts and music and drama and poetry and so on. But I realized that truth is not, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if somebody comes to you and says, no, you've got it wrong. There are not 100 billion galaxies in this universe. There are 200 billion galaxies. You're false. You'd say, so what, for God's sake? Does it really matter? I mean, who's counting? If you tried to count to 1 billion, it would take your whole life. Now, we just don't care about those little things, but what do we really want in life? To survive the way Darwin told us? To just get ours the way Adam Smith told us? To sort of get rid of our subconscious complexes the way Freud told us? Frankly, I haven't seen a single saint come out of psychoanalysis. Something to think about, isn't it? I haven't seen anybody radiant as a result of psychoanalysis. All of them are there thinking about themselves. Well, my mother did so-and-so when I was 5, and I wish she hadn't. It doesn't seem to do what we really want. It may help us to get rid of some complexes, but basically what I think it does is land people in some new pastiche, some new soup. You just don't really get out of it. Freud himself had all sorts of complexes. He was worried to death about his own death. In the mid-40s on till the time he died in I think it was his 70s, I'm not sure anymore, he would say such things as, well, I don't know if you'll see me tomorrow. He was absolutely obsessed with dying. So this is somebody you go to help you to overcome your obsessions? I mean, look at a photograph of him. It's not necessarily somebody you'd think, oh, Jesus Christ. Not quite. There's a subtle difference. But you see that there are people, and this is one of the marvelous things, if you look at the different things that people have done, all the different avenues that people have explored, everything that people have sought to become, explorers, scientists, composers, singers, actors, businessmen, housewives, etc., etc. You don't find in any field somebody standing at the top of the heap saying, yes, I've made it, and it's what everybody's looking for. Honestly, I think that most authors would just as soon other people didn't write. Most singers would just as soon other people didn't sing. There's a certain amount of feeling of being crowded at the top. And so, no, there isn't that. What you find instead is a certain amount of disillusionment. They get there and, well, Howard Hughes, at his time, was said to be the most wealthy person in the world. Somebody asked him a week on the telephone, a week before he died, are you happy? No, I can't say I'm happy. Well, you know, there are more suicides among millionaires than there are among paupers. It's got to tell you something. You don't find in any field of life that people who reach the end say, yes, I've made it. Or if they feel it for a while, they always feel it, accepting it as a compromise. Yeah, it's okay for me, I don't know about you. But you know there's one startling exception to that whole parade. Those who have sought God, they may be Hindus, they may be Muslims, they may be Christians, they may be anything. But if they sincerely sought communion with God, you can't seek that without having something. It's not, I've read stories in which people wasted their lives seeking God. Those stories were written by people who had not spent 5 minutes seeking God. I can tell you, from my life, from the lives of many, many other people that I know, that living for God is its own reward. Those people who have sought communion with God certainly have something. They certainly have some communion. They may not be saints, they may not be St. Francis's, but they've got something. And every one of them says, this is what life is all about. You find absolute unanimity, in fact, those who have found and are reputed to have found that which everybody is looking for, grace, love, joy. Not one of them says, well, it's okay if you like it. They all say this is what life is about. They're willing to give up their lives in order to help other people to find it. There's no other field of endeavor that gives you that result. It's infallible. There's not a single exception to it. I'd call that a pretty cogent argument. Why not give it a try? You know, I'll bargain with you. You don't have to give up everything and go off to a cave. I haven't done it. God, I'd have loved to. But that wasn't my destiny. It doesn't have to be. I've known saints, really, people who are drunk with the thought and the presence of God, working in business, working in a home, doing all kinds of things. It doesn't matter what you do. It matters where your heart is. But what I've noticed is that the more people do live in that thought, the more happiness and inspiration they have. This is what I wanted as a teenager. I thought, facts don't matter. It doesn't matter how many stars, galaxies, etc. there are in the universe. How can I find more inspiration? That's what I want. I want joy. I want to feel inspired in life. I don't want to just go trudging from office to home, home to office. It's sort of like the mollusk in the Monterey Aquarium I saw a few years ago. This mollusk, I don't know the name of the mollusk. It takes it about 15 years, but all the mollusk does, mind you, it's not a very inspired existence. It just sort of moves back and forth, rubbing against the rock. Now, it isn't the wind or the tide. It's conscious. It's doing it consciously. But I can't think that it's got a very exciting intellectual life. At the end of 15 years, it sort of digs itself into the rock, enough so it can nestle in there and sees plankton as it passes by. Well, it's not a very inspiring existence, but it's a beginning. I don't think that as a human being who am capable of something more, I don't think it's enough to just go and work, come home, eat, watch television, work, come home, watch television, eat. It's not enough. There's something in us that just is agonized at the anguishing monotony of it. And how do you overcome that monotony? By getting excited. I was in a barber shop in Rome a few months ago, and the barber, or maybe he was thinking of his customers, I'm not at all sure. Maybe he was an Adam Smithian and thinking only of himself. But anyway, the television was on. I was amazed. I don't watch television as a rule, but I was amazed to see that every 2 seconds the scene changed. People need excitement. That's all it's about. And so they get excited enough and get sort of distracted enough so that they hang in there until finally they die. And that's what Jesus meant when he said, let the dead bury their dead. Some people are dead already. Other people, it's just a matter of time before the undertaker finds out. But they're really not alive. I mean, there was a story of a well-known author. I forget her name. But anyway, it's really a sort of heartrending in a way. These old people sitting on a porch, and they're sitting on rocking chairs, and nobody says anything. Finally says, there's a fella on a boat. Long pause, then heavily, yeah. Well, it's not much above the mollusk, surely. Can't you understand that there's inspiration to be had in life? There's joy to be had in life. Listen, I lived with somebody who was a saint, a master. I don't see he went around giggling, for heaven's sake. His joy was much too deep for that. But boy, even just being in his presence, I would feel so uplifted. I would feel that life is worth it. There was a joy that was tangible. This is what the great masters have. Why did people follow Jesus? You get the impression that they followed him because he was sitting there grieving over their sins. Listen, if anybody were to sit there grieving about your sins, I don't think you'd follow him. You'd go the other way. He had something they wanted. He had joy. We all want joy. We all want peace. We all want to be inspired. He had those qualities. That's why people said, this man speaketh as no man spake before. It isn't that he was talking French or something. He was talking with joy, and people felt that joy from him. Well, this is what life should be all about. Now, if you can find people who don't just want to live together, just to sort of exist together, I mean, you can find a field of cows doing that. But I'm talking of communities where people get together because they have a shared ideal. They have a shared belief in the possibility of finding more in life than just humdrum existence. And this is the beautiful thing about communities, that you can get people like that who say that I'm not satisfied with a life that just gives me food. I want more than that. Engel, at the funeral oration, or is it peroration, of Karl Marx, said that he helped people to understand that until we have food and roof over our heads, we aren't satisfied. Well, okay, so you need food. Obviously you need food. Obviously, if there are Arctic winds blowing out, you'd like to be protected. Life begins with that. It doesn't end with that. He didn't talk of inspiration. Freud didn't talk about inspiration. Marx didn't talk about inspiration. None of them do. It's all materialism. There's something in our hearts that says, no, there's got to be more. And if people say, as in fact my father said to me once years ago, I said, we're not just animals. He said, that's all we are. I said, well, speak for yourself. It wasn't quite the respect that a son should show, I grant you. But I'd been fed up with so much of that kind of attitude from scientists who give you absolutely nothing to live for. And I found, living with a great saint, that indeed there is joy in life. Indeed, God can become a reality, that God doesn't have to be defined cosmically. It's enough. In fact, he brought it down right to the basics. He said, what do you want in life? One thing only. It's two sides of the same coin. You want to avoid pain and find happiness. And everybody is motivated by that single desire. We're all trying to find the same things. We can call it differently, just as an Indian would say, well, food to him means curry. To an American, it might mean mashed potatoes and peas and gravy, or pancakes or something. To an Italian, it might mean pasta. But food is food. Inspiration is inspiration. It doesn't have to be Christian, doesn't have to be Buddhist. Even you don't have to think about God if you are willing to expand your consciousness and not just be locked up in your own little ego. Well, this is what's wonderful about communities. This is why I feel that, yes, I've done some good with my life, because I've set an example, and after a lot of hard work and a lot of obstacles, I have been able to prove that it does work. Now, if everybody among these hundreds of people who belong to these different Ananda communities were to go off and live in a different city, he would have, as a result of the meditation, the practices, the beliefs, and so on, he would have something. When everybody in the office was arguing and fighting, he would be peaceful. When the neighbors were all getting upset about something, he would be charitable. And so people would end up coming to him and saying, well, what have you got that seems so real? If he were to say, well, it's what I do, it's my meditation, it's my etc. I think the average answer, if they don't come up with some answer like, oh, it's because you eat bran for breakfast, they're likely to say that, well, you're just a special kind of person. That is not true. Somebody came to me years ago and he said, you have some wonderful people here. I said, listen, if you met one or two people like this, you could say they're wonderful. You meet a lot of people like this, you have to say it's what they're doing that makes them that way. Everybody, if he just turns his angle of vision, looks at things in a new way, does things in a new way, the most pessimistic, suicidal, miserable, maniacal, criminal person on the world can become a saint. There's no difference. Every one of us can become happy, inspired, but you need the example of a few. And when you get a few people living together instead of scattered, people begin to take notice. And this is what's been happening, that people are coming from all over the world saying, what's happening? Why are you people like this? Well, how do we have an influence on all these different countries? Because we're together. This is what's needed today, communities of people who live in ways that work. And in this book, I don't even mention Ananda once. I don't mention Yogananda once. I just say communities because many kinds of communities are needed. But when people can live together, when people can try, and by trial and error say, well, this way works and that way doesn't, that's what's needed today. We live in an age of experimentation. Why not try this? I've come from Italy to America to urge you, join communities. I don't say join Ananda. Sure, it's something that's real. Sure, it's something I've started, but I'm not a proselytizer. I always tell people I'm only trying to convert you to your own higher self. If you can learn who you are, and in your relationship to life, to God, to everything, you've got to find it your way. There's so many different ways. Some people like chocolate, some people like sugar, some people like candy. Everybody likes sweetness. Some people like inspiration in art, sometimes in music, some in science. Doesn't matter. I don't say it has to be this way. But boy, if it works, then isn't that an example at least? I would frankly not want a whole country composed of Ananda communities. My God, the headache. But honestly, if this can inspire a few people to say, yeah, I like that idea. Let me do it with my friends. Let's get together, live together, try to share our ideals, and not just like a pathetic story I mentioned in this book too, to show you the kind of community you often find in the cities. It's a true story. This couple was moving out of an apartment that they'd been living in for 2 years. And their suitcases were out on the mat. When people from upstairs came down and saw the suitcases, they said, "Oh, you've just arrived. Welcome. This is we're all one big happy family in this apartment house. Do come up and visit us." And goodbye. And just like another cocktail party salutation, they were off. They'd been there 2 years and they hadn't known that they were there for 2 years. Some big happy family, I must say. One of the diseases of city life today is loneliness. We need friends. We need friends not only to laugh with, as at a cocktail party, but to cry with. People you can confide in. You know, the wonderful thing about Ananda is that when somebody's in trouble, everybody's there to help them. You know, the typical small town where people, there's so much maliciousness and gossip. Somebody does something wrong, they're all down on him. It's absolutely the opposite at Ananda, where somebody goes wrong, somebody makes a mistake, whatever it is, or somebody has trouble. Everybody's there wanting to help him. There isn't that kind of gossip. Sure, we all know each other. We all know each other's life and problems, but we're all trying to help each other. It's so wonderful to see that when everybody is pulling together and somebody loses a job, there's always a way for him to be picked up so that he can carry on. You know, when our community, our Earth Song, it was our health food store in Nevada City, burned down. Somebody left a coffee maker on and it started a fire that destroyed everything. It took us at least 6 months to rebuild it so we could open again. Now, almost any store like that would have just had to go under. We were able to hang in there long enough to be able to build it again, make it more beautiful than ever. Well, this is what you have when you have a group of people pulling together. Each can help the other. Each can say, okay, we'll tide it over. Again and again, we've had so many crises. And yet in every case, we've come through because just like an old story, you probably read it among your fairy stories when you were a child. This old man was dying and he had 6 sons. He asked them to bring 6 sticks. They brought him 6 sticks. And he said, okay, now just take 1 stick. Easily, he could snap it. On the deathbed, still he could snap that stick. Then he put the others together. He said, now you try together. They couldn't break those other sticks. When you have unity with others, when there's real heartfelt unity, then you have something that can stand against trials. If there's an economic collapse in America and in the world, which I see coming, it won't touch you in the same way. Each can help the other. You know, one of the wonderful things about Ananda is that whatever the need is, there's somebody who's an expert in that particular thing. You get enough hundreds of people and you've got some, after all, it takes it takes a certain amount of intelligence to join a community. People think that, well, only mindless people would do it. Far from it. You've got to think things through strongly and clearly enough to resist all the pressure from relatives, neighbors, everything who say, no, that won't work, can't do it, it isn't the way we do it, and so on. There's a lot to buck when you decide I'm going to join a community like this. But these people are all, with their independent mindedness, they've come together. And with that, you'll find that there's always an unusually high level of competence, even in the so-called business and competitive world. The solution of communities, which is really the basis of this book here, I show that at this time in history, it is the best solution available. I believe it is something that will spread as Yogananda predicted it would, like wildfire. I think more and more people, there was one little town back in the 30s in the Depression that thrived. Why? Because they printed their own money. Money was unavailable, so they made their own currency. It was within their own thing. I don't know if they printed it or gave it in the form of credits, but they thrived. If every community could just say, okay, we're at least together, you'd be amazed how much strength you can get from that. We don't have to think in terms of bigness. Just think in terms of sincerity. Be sincere to yourself. Be sincere to your friends. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by sincerity also. 1976. What's that? 26 years ago. There was a forest fire that just about wiped out Ananda. Destroyed 450 acres of our 600 or so acres. Destroyed 21 of our 22 homes in that part of the forest that was destroyed, which was most of our homes. We had no insurance. We were too young, hadn't enough money to buy insurance, so we had nothing, no background. Everybody assumed we'd fail. Now, at that point, neighbors phoned us and said that it had been found that the fire was due to a faulty spark arrestor on a county vehicle. Now you figure that one. What would most people do? It seems obvious, doesn't it? They'd sue. That's what they did. They were all excited about how they could sue the county, get their money back, rebuild, and so on. We said, no, we're not going to take our bad luck on our out on our neighbors. If we sued the county, sure, the insurance company would pay, but then the county would have to raise its rates. They would be taking it out on our neighbors in the long run. We said, no, we'll just take our bad luck out on ourselves, and we'll stand firm if we can, and if we don't, okay. We're still thriving. 10 years later, our neighbors were still moaning over what they'd lost. They sued, they collected. We could have sued for $2 million. We could have built everything again, and new things too. We didn't want to do it. I'm sure those supervisors were waiting for the second shoe to fall. Well, it never did. It's just the way we think, the way we believe. We don't think in terms of us four and no more. What's good for Ananda is all that matters. If it's harmful to you, it doesn't matter. We don't think that way. We think if it's going to hurt you, it'll hurt us too in one way or another. What's good for us has to be good for everyone, or it's not good for us. Now that's what I mean by community philosophy. Not a closed door thing, but something that puts you in touch with the needs of other people, something that makes you sensitive to the needs of other people, something that made me feel when I met that woman shopkeeper in Taormina, this poor woman, she doesn't really understand. And so I brought her around to the point where she really, I think she's changed. She just had a completely different outlook when I saw her the last time. Well, this is what we need. Communities are the way to do it. Don't think selfishly. Think of that other kind of selfishness, which is true. It is selfish. Jesus Christ wouldn't have saved anybody or worried about saving people if he had known for sure that he'd be damned for eternity for doing so. He did it because he found fulfillment doing it. He did it because he found himself blessed in doing it. You are blessed the more you do for other people. You are cursed the more you take from them and live for yourself. Now, communities can prove it. Individuals, pretty hard to do. So many different things can account for somebody being who and what he is. But in a community, you have a living laboratory. Ours has been going now for 34, 35 years, and we've seen hundreds of people. And we have certain basic teachings, this being one of them. And in seeing people living, some of them live it well, some of them live it less well, some of them don't live it. You don't force your things on people. You can't make people be what you want them to be. You offer, and if they take it, fine, and if they don't, it's their problem. But what you find is that in every case, and there are no exceptions to it, those who think in terms of what's good for all are the ones who thrive. Those who think in terms of, yeah, well, what about me? I got to think about me. I got to get mine. They never thrive. They never make ends meet even. It's been a laboratory experiment that has pretty well proven what I'm talking about. Communities can do that. When you look at the world today, you think, is there really hope? But if a few people can make it work and show that it works, those few people are going to change the world. Not big social movements, not government control. It won't come that way. It's got to come from the grassroots. This is how Ananda itself has grown, from the grassroots. Nobody up there saying, do this, do that. Always from the understanding of the people. I say there is hope for a better world, and I say that that hope lies in your hands.